ABC, Jamie here, back again with another video. Just wanting to share some more of the music that I've been playing in the last week or so. I hope you guys are all doing okay. Things are pretty uncertain here again at the moment. Up in Scotland, where I live, the majority of the hospitality sector has been closed, and my job is connected to supplying those businesses. So yeah, it's some pretty strange and uncertain times again ahead of us, I think, but doing my best, as I'm sure all of us are here, to try and find a bit of solace in music as best as we can. So with that in mind, I've got I think 10 or 11 bits of music that I've been playing in the last week. So to start off, this is the one and only Mr. Yusef Lateef. And as a few of you I'm sure were aware, on Friday it would have been his 100th birthday. So I've been pulling out a few of his records just to listen to again and kind of marvel at what incredible musician, what a pioneering and influential musician he was as well. Born in Detroit originally, but really a musician that in the early days I think cut his teeth in the kind of R&B and the R&B scene in Detroit. But towards the late 50s really began to branch out and really engage and take a deep interest in Eastern music, Eastern cultures, and with that mastery of a huge array of woodwind instruments. So this is his record Eastern Sounds. It's possibly his most famous record, so probably his most influential one. This was recorded originally on Moodsville in 1961, which was a subsidiary of the Prestige label. My copy is from 1966. This is on Transatlantic Records, which was kind of the UK pressing equivalent of a lot of those Prestige albums. But yeah, on here you have Barry Harris on piano, who really is kind of the secret ingredient to this album, I think, that ties what could be quite a disparate record together, as Lateef is on tenor sax, oboe, flute, Chinese clay flute at one point, and yeah, what could be quite a messy, disparate record, I think. Harris's kind of piano playing holds it all together. You've got Ernie Farrow, who plays bass, and rabat as well, and then Lex Humphreys on drums, who had a run in the mid-60s where he was the drummer on a lot of amazing records. He was in Duke Pearson's group for a while, Donald Byrd as well. He's a beautiful, beautiful brush player, and you hear that to great effect on all sorts of tracks on here. Love Theme from Spartacus is beautiful, as is Purple Flower. But yeah, I mean, the two standouts really for me. I mean, Love Theme from Spartacus I think is probably the one that most people are familiar with from a cover from that movie. But yeah, the Plum Blossom, which opens up this album, has Lateef playing the aforementioned Chinese clay flute, and it's only capable of playing 5 notes really, and he spins out in 4 or 5 minutes the most inventive improvisation with just the fewest number of notes. I mean, if you want to talk about minimalism in jazz, and you know, people mention regularly Miles Davis about the notes that he doesn't play having the greatest power. That's exactly the same for Lateef on this track. It's so spare and it's so sparse, but such a purity to the expression on it. It's not showy in the slightest, and it has this kind of dreamlike, ethereal quality that welcomes you into the album, really. And then the other one would be Snafu on side B, which is really Lateef showcasing what a wonderful blues player he is on a tenor sax. I mean, people focus a lot on that Eastern experimentation that he had on other instruments, but he's just a great blues player, and that Snafu here is fully in the sort of Coltrane, Sonny Rollins tradition of that muscular but expansive, probing tenor sax playing that you find in this era as well. But yeah, this is a marvelous record. I'm sure most of you know it, but I couldn't not listen to it this week and show it, because I think it's stunning. And yeah, more Yusef Lateef here on Impulse. This is Jazz Around the World, which was his debut record on the label in 1964. And it's a funny one, this, because I sort of get the impression that Bob Thiel, the producer for the record label, knew of Lateef and his experimentation with different instruments, and basically said to him, well, you know lots of different music from all over the place. Why don't you do an album themed around, different countries in the globe? And you sort of look at it as a concept and you think, this might be a bit gimmicky, this might sound a bit ropey. And I'll be honest, it's a patchy record. There are moments on it, there's one piece, The Good Old Roast Beef of England, which I could really, really take or leave. I don't have much positive to say about that piece, but there's a couple on here, particularly India, which obviously has Indian modes in it that kind of speak for itself with the title. But his version of a Japanese folk song called Ringo Owake, which is a beautiful melody, it's a stunning version of that. Kenny Barron does a beautiful version on an album of his called Landscapes as well. But this is, I think, the first time it was interpreted in a jazz context. And yeah, it's a good record. This it's not essential, but it sounds amazing as well, as a lot of these Impulse records do too. This is an original mono, this one from 1964. And then, sort of sticking with Lateef, I pulled out this record which came out last year, and this is the Nat Virtual Quartet, with a tribute to Youssef Lateef. This is called The Storyteller. Now, Nat Virtual is a saxophonist from Manchester. In fact, I think I maybe had an album of his playing in the background, his most recent one, possibly on my first or second video. And he's certainly one of our country's finest jazz musicians. He's been kind of a leading light in the scene for a good 15, 20 years now. Lateef has a big influence on him as a musician, as does John Coltrane. But what you have on this record is, it's a double LP. There are, I think, about 12 or 13 tracks in total, and it's a mixture of covers of Yusef Lateef songs, like Ching Miao, Morning, of course, The Great Brother John, which is without question one of my favourite Lateef compositions, tribute to John Coltrane. But within that as well, there are also versions of songs which Lateef covered himself, like Love Theme from Spartacus, and also Ringo Owake again, which I mentioned with the previous records. And then 2 or 3 of Virtual's own compositions, which are really intended to be his own expression of how he hears the sound of Youssef Lateef. It's a great record, this. Came out last year, as I said, one of my favourite UK jazz releases from last year. And this came out on the Jazzman label. I think you can still find this relatively easy, and it's worth checking out for sure. So another musician who whose birthday would have been, I should say, in the last couple of days was, of course, the one and only Thelonious Monk. There's so much that could be said about Monk. I'm sure there's plenty of people that have been sharing Monk records in the last couple of days. I've seen a lot of it on Instagram for sure. But rather than share some of the Monk records that I've got behind me, I thought I would maybe take a slightly different slant here. So here is the great drummer Paul Motian, who to me really is like the Thelonious Monk of the drums in a lot of ways. He actually played with Monk for a period earlier in his career, around about the same time as he was playing with the great Bill Evans and Scott LaFaro. This is a record which he put out on the JMT label in 1988, and it's entirely covers of Thelonious Monk tracks. This is called Monk in Motion. Now, the band on this was one of Motion's best, I think. There's Joe Lovano on tenor, and the great Bill Frisell on electric guitar, and just a marvelously like atmospheric band. They have the ability to go from these sort of ethereal soundscapes, which you find a lot on the last records that they put out on ECM in the mid 2000s, but also this sort of explosive, dissonant, fiery stuff as well. And Frisell does a lot of his kind of trademark stuff with loops and his sort of quite heavily reverb drenched sound. And so when you have that trio working with Monk pieces, what you get is this really interesting, well, I was going to say clash of cultures, but it's not really a clash because there's so much in there in terms of their idiosyncrasies of how they play, especially motions playing, that it works brilliantly. On here they do versions of Ruby My Dear, Straight No Chaser, Epistrophe, Crepuscule with Nelly as well, Jerry Allen appears on Ruby My Dear, as does Dewey Redman. He's on Epistrophe, and Jerry Allen's turn, especially on here, just like lifts the album to a whole other level. It's a great covers record. There sometimes these sort of interpretations of other musicians' albums can be a little bit hokey, but that Nat Virtual one I shared before and this Motion one for sure are great examples. As I said, Motion really to me is like the Thelonious Monk of the drums. He is always playful. There's a sort of almost childlike quality to his playing sometimes. Always takes unexpected left turns or right turns, plays notes you're not expecting, leaves huge gaps. As a drummer, I find his playing just constantly fascinating, exciting, engaging. So yeah, check this out if you don't know it, and check out the trio records that he did with the main group on this album as well. It Should Have Happened a Long Time Ago on ECM is worth looking out for. As is I Have the Room Above Her, which was a later ECM record from I think 2006. Both of those are more or less essential, I would say. From Paul Motion's interpretation of Monk to the one and only Andrew Hill. Now, this obviously is not a record that is a tribute to Monk in any way, but in many ways Hill was the logical extension of the experimentation of Thelonious Monk. Alfred Lion of Blue Note Records very much saw him as the next stage in Monk's evolution. A word for Alfred Lion as well before I talk about this record. Andrew Hill's output on Blue Note has to be some of the most important jazz of the 20th century for me. And none of it's particularly commercial, it didn't sell well at the time, but Lion recognised how special a pianist he was and channeled the power of a label like Blue Note to actually document a musician of his quality. So for every Lou Donaldson record or Jimmy Smith record that the label was putting out, and no disrespect to either of those artists because those records are incredible, but they were commercially successful, and that allowed Lion to afford to be able to record and release as many Hill records as he did. I think Hill recorded something like 7 or 8 sessions in a period of like 2 years, all of which became what's now retrospectively been seen as some of the most important jazz of the period. So this is Compulsion, which was recorded in 1965, and this features Freddie Hubbard on trumpet, the great John Gilmore on tenor sax and bass clarinet, Hill of course on piano, Cecil McBee and Richard Davis, his longtime collaborator Richard Davis on bass, Joe Chambers on drums, and 2 additional percussionists, Neddy Kamar and Renaud Simmons. And this really is a percussive record. It's pretty experimental, even by Hill standards, Very, very fascinated in rhythm and rhythmic shifts. And I think it's probably the closest Hill ever got to Val Wilmer's description of Cecil Taylor, which was that he was playing 88 tiny tuned drums. That's what you hear on this record. I mean, Hill is always someone, I talked about, that kind of continuation of Monk's music. Hill's someone who rhythmically I find so fascinating. He never plays the obvious rhythms or the obvious notes. He's constantly shifting his playing and the sound of the notes he's playing across bar lines and landing things in unusual places. He's almost playing chords out with time changes sometimes, even while the rhythm section underneath him is playing something that has a conventional pulse to it. So yeah, this is a brilliant album. It's not an easy listen at all, but yeah, I think this was one that Hill devised as, it's in 4 pieces, as sort of a expression of the path of African Americans up to the year 1965. And really, I mean, if you look at the titles of the tracks, Compulsion, Legacy, Premonition, and then it ends with Limbo, so there's no resolution to this album at all. But it's, it's a really, really, I don't know, what's the best word for this? I don't know, it's a fascinating record. And it's one that I return to over and over again because there's a real density in this. So, if you don't know this, check it out. It's probably one of the lesser recognized Hill albums on Blue Note, but it's terrific. Yeah, Andrew Hill, Compulsion. That took me to dig this out as well. This is a later Hill record on the East Wind label from 1976. This is Nefertiti, and not to be confused with either the Cecil Taylor composition or the Wayne Shorter one for that matter. This is a completely different piece. This is a trio date with Roger Blank on drums, and once again Richard Davis on bass, who really shines on this record, as he does on a lot of the sessions he appeared on. But yeah, the title track on this in particular features Davis on arco bass, which he was a wonderful proponent of, and it's just deeply atmospheric music. Again, always taking unexpected directions, and sort of tumbling here and there. But yeah, very engaging, and sort of bewitching. It's a very unusual trio record, this, in its sound. There's something almost uncategorizable about Hill's playing, which you see on this in spades. So yeah, Andrew Hill, Nefertiti featuring Richard Davis. More Richard Davis here. I really couldn't get enough of hearing him on Nefertiti especially. So I pulled this out, which is I think this was his debut record. This was on Cobblestone in 1972. And this record is called The Philosophy of the Spiritual. And this is predominantly a feature record for Davis's arco bass playing. So Bill Lee, also a bass player, arranged and composed a lot of the pieces on this record, and then basically provides the anchor on bass himself, that then allows Davis to solo atop the rest of the band. And the band features Chick Corea on piano, Sam Brown on guitar, Sonny Brown on drums, and Frankie Dunlop on additional percussion. Davis is playing on Dear Old Stockholm. The cover of Dear Old Stockholm is beautifully expressionistic. That bowed bass sound, it's not quite cello-like in the way it can capture the human voice, but it's really not far off, So yeah, that is a beautiful version. There's also a really moving piece called Oh My God, which almost has this dread-like desperation to its sound. It feels like it's almost in a state of cry or panic. Again, I talk about the expressiveness of the sound on there. You really hear it. And then there's a piece called The Rabbi, which is sort of dipping into sort of Jewish culture a little, and that's Davis on, he plays pizzicato rather than bowed bass on this, and that's a sort of churning modal piece. But yeah, if you don't know this one, this is a really cool record. That's a great sort of bass feature and a great showcase for Richard Davis, who really is one of the most creative and interesting bass players of the period. He could play anything from sort of orchestral works with Bernstein all the way to free jazz, really. Marvelous musician. Yeah, so then I guess a slightly left turn. I listened to this again a few times this week, and this I think is probably my favourite solo piano record of all time. This is the great Stanley Cowell, and this is an album called Musa, Ancestral Streams, which came out on Strata East in 1974. And it's just, there are a number of sort of signature Stanley Cowell compositions on here. Abscretions, which is always, anytime you hear a version of it, it has a real swagger to it. Even solo here, it has that sway and swagger. Equipoise, which is just beautiful. It's almost dignified, I guess, is a word that comes to mind when I think of this. A couple of pieces from Illusion Suite, his trio record on ECM, Emil Dannenberg, and then My Moon, which has been covered many times, as Marion Brown's got a beautiful version of it on Vista, which I've showed previously. But the version on here will move you to tears, really. His touch on it is gorgeous. An interesting piece, Traveling Man, as well, which has him on kalimba and then overdubbed with Fender Rhodes as well. Mostly it's acoustic piano, but that one there in Fender Rhodes, it's really interesting kind of textural variation. But yeah, this is front to back brilliant album, like genuinely brilliant solo piano album, and has a very unique atmosphere to it. Killer. Check it out if you don't know it. I guess another left turn here, actually. This is moving to 2019. I guess sort of related in that it has a lot of stripped back texture to it. This is Greg Hampshire and Warren Fote, who are a duo, both from England. This was released on the Edinburgh label Athens of the North last year. This is called St. Lawrence. And Hampshire and Fote have done, I think, 4 or 5 records at this point now as a duo, all of which are sort of a mixture of jazz, library music, bits of folk, some ambient electronica stuff as well. This was all recorded early last year on the Isle of Wight, in a small church pictured on the cover here, called the St. Lawrence Church, or chapel even. I think it was possibly a chapel. It's got a gorgeous atmosphere to it. There's a real sense of solace and peace and solitude to it. It's a very quiet, calm, reflective record. I reached for this one quite a lot back in March, actually, when everything sort of collapsed the first time. And I found myself coming back to it again this week. Just very hushed acoustic guitar, quiet piano. There's some church organ on there, and then some sort of bells and kalimba as well. So say it's gorgeously atmospheric. And if there's a piece to look up, which I really urge you do, it's a 2-part piece called The Solitude of Certitudes. And that's made me cry a number of times. It's beautiful. It's about 7.5 minutes all in, and it's just perfectly restrained again, just like the minimal, lightest of touch, but sort of maximum power in it emotionally. Wonderful album, Hampshire and Fote, St. Lawrence. And then finally, moving to Brazil, but sort of Brazil within the UK. This is the great Caetano Veloso, and this is his 1972 record, Trança. This is an original, actually crazy artwork on this. It's actually beautiful, sort of trifold here. Basically, you can collapse it into a pyramid, which I've never tried to do because I'll probably damage the sleeve too much. But yeah, this is an album that was recorded in London while Veloso was in political exile from Brazil with his compatriot Gilberto Gil as well. And very, very interesting atmosphere on this one. It's one of Veloso's only albums where most of the tracks are recorded in English. I think as a result maybe makes it a little more approachable. But it has a very detached, quite solitary vibe to it, despite the fact there's a full band on here, which Veloso leads predominantly on acoustic guitar. There's a real sense of sort of distance, and almost an emotional distance that he's putting between you and the songs, and a slight almost bitterness as well. I think the album opens with the lines, "You don't know me at all, bet you'll never get to know me at all," and you don't know whether he's talking to you, the audience, or to people in his home country, or it's difficult to say. But it's a fusion of folk sounds, but also there's some moving into sort of psychedelia as well on here. Excuse me. But it's a really entrancing record, this one. The whole atmosphere to it is very, very unique. And I don't know, I found myself really drawn to this week for some reason. But yeah, it's a really cool record, this. And one that I'd highly recommend checking out. It's certainly one of the high points of Brazilian music for me, certainly that I own for sure. So my voice is starting to go, as you might be able to hear, so that is probably a cue for me to stop. So thanks as always for watching if you made it this far. Until next time, take care and look after yourselves. Cheers.